Welcome back. So let's do the final step to kind of make our solution work again, but this time work with actually a real SQL database instead of the good old in-memory stuff we built earlier. So I'm jumping into my REST API, I'm jumping into my startup file. Now I have to start using the new setup, so let's just start with going into dependencies and actually removing access to the old static setup. So I'll just delete this reference right here. This is for the static data setup, right? I'll remove that reference, and of course that'll give me some errors because we're using that static setup in the current solution. So if you notice right here, this guy is now gone, so I can just remove that here as well. And now you'll notice I start getting some errors, of course, because I don't know anything about the old repository or the auto repository anymore. We need to know that again. So the next thing is, of course, to add a dependency to the new project, which is just called data right here, and I'll say okay. There we go. Now that is added, and I can now start implementing, I can start using these new repositories instead of the old ones, and you'll notice the only thing that happened is just I got access to the new repository setup right there. So that's kind of, notice again, I'm not changing anything in the core of the application here. I haven't at all looked at the core of the application. This should be the safe area. This should be the area that doesn't change even though I change the infrastructure or the UI. Nothing changes in the core. So that's pretty much all I had to do. Now, we could delete this guy now because we're not going to need him, but later you can go in and check some of your code to kind of see if you can reuse some of it if you want to. But you could actually delete this guy now if you don't want to use him anymore. We need one more thing. We need to explain, because in the old setup, we had the fake database. And the fake database was very, very easy. The fake database just initialized some stuff, and we didn't have to add information about the actual database because it was already in here, right? But in the new setup, we need to explain where's the actual database, because you can have a database in the cloud, you can have a database locally on your machine, you could have a database anywhere now, and we need to kind of explain to this system where does our database reside. And we're going to start out by making what we call an in-memory database. And I'm going to show you in the configure service, just like we add the scopes, we can actually dependency inject our database. And that's so amazing. And you know what, when we start doing development and production code, you'll see how powerful it is that on runtime you can decide what database you want to use. So working locally, you can use an SQLite, and when we deploy this to live, automatically it says, oh, I'm on live now, maybe I should use the live database instead. So powerful, so powerful. Okay, let's try and do this. I'll say services, I'll say dot, and this time I'll say DB context, because I want to start using, I want to add a DB context right here. I'll explain that I'm going to use the DB context of customer app context, right? Customer app context, that's the one I built. So that's, remember, this is the exact class that you guys built yourselves right here. It's this context right here inside the data that I'm using. No magic, it's this context right here that I'm saying I want to add one of these guys. So now it's going to, behind the scenes, create a new context and add it. Now what I need to do is I need to explain the options that I want to use. Now remember, when we built the context, we kind of made the constructor have options when we created it. So we need to add these options into our context. And how do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. You can actually use a lambda expression right here. So I'll say opt, that's the options that I'm going to pass in. And I want to create some options right here. And I can say opt dot, and then Microsoft created something called In-Memory Database for you. So all I have to do is say use In-Memory Database. There we go. And then I have to explain what I want to call this database, because you might want to have multiple in-memory databases. So I'll just call this the database. And that's just a name. So you can put in anything you want. And that's all we had to do. Now I dependency inject a context. Right now it's an in-memory database. That's not an SQL database. It's just a fake SQL database, just pretending to be an SQL database, but it can show you the exact same thing that an SQL database would actually show you. So we need to set that up. So now we dependency inject the database, we dependency inject our repositories again, and we can actually start using this application now, but instead of being with a basic list setup, it's now with a real in-memory database-ish thing. Don't worry, we'll soon switch to SQLite, but I just want to show you this running. So let's just try and start our application. So the application is running. Let's try and go into Postman and just try and get all customers, just like we've done so many times. But now it should just return, let's see what happens, it returns a blank list of customers because we don't have any customers in our database. And that was why we needed the post request as well, because we need to be able to right now create a customer, right? So let's try and send that in here. Boom, we have a customer inside our database. Let's try and get all customers again. Boom, we're getting back a list of customers with a single customer. Let's try and post another customer. Now notice, it doesn't seem like anything has changed. And that's the power of it, right? Because nothing have changed except that now we're saving our data in a different way than what we did in the last series, right? There we go, now we have 2 customers. And I can actually even go and get a single customer, I think. Let's try and do that, get customer with ID of 1. And there we go, we get an exception. We'll figure that out later. But now you have access to the real database. Now this guy is failing because of the dependency that we actually have, and it tries to actually help me out getting a dependency. We haven't fixed that yet, so we'll go and fix it later. Don't worry about that right now. If you can get a list of customers or pets or whatever you guys build, and you can actually post a new pet or customer, you're golden. That's a good start. We'll go and fix the rest later. So that's it for this lesson. Now you guys have a full running setup with a clean architecture, a REST API, and a DB context for working with databases. Booyah! See you next time. Have fun.